Welcome everybody. My name is Jeff McGinnis, National Beverage Director for the WineStyles family of stores. Seems like a few months ago we set off on this trilogy, so to speak, of Clos LaChance family of wines and wineries, and we are definitely finishing it strong with their namesake wineries, right? We've got two special guests here with us again. Familiar face, David. David has been our partner all along with all of these, Hayes Valley, as well as our Styles wines. We've had various other folks join with us, I should say, and talk us through the wines. David, I'm going to hand it off to you, and maybe you'd be best equipped to introduce Jason for us.
Oh, that's a tall task. He's the man, he's the myth, he's the legend. He is the man in charge of making sure that everything we're going to taste tonight is absolutely fantastic. I'll tell you a few things that I really admire about Jason. He is one of those winemakers that may be young in age, but I feel like he's an old soul when it comes to making wine. I feel like his approach is great wines are grown, not made. He is truly a great steward of the land, and I feel like his approach is a lot more Eurocentric. So as we taste through tonight, you'll experience these wines as ones that show true typicity for the grape in the region and show great balance, and which is a hard thing to find these days in wines that offer this kind of value. Jason is truly got his fingers on the pulse of all that is Clos LaChance and the estate. And I think he does an amazing job of expressing what that land is capable of. I think actually one of the other things that I was complimenting on just earlier this week is he's also one of those rare winemakers that is very personable, and he's very good at explaining things in a way that all of us can easily understand. But I don't want to steal his thunder. I'll let him chime in at any point here.
All right. Well, thank you, David. I guess for that mic drop, can I go or no? That's it. If I'm not mistaken, Jeff, that didn't look like a glass of wine in your hand, but I guess after a long day, we'll forgive it.
I'm next door. I should have ran Brian and the gang are next door over there, and we're moving into some new things here, and I just wanted to try a martini. So yeah.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with a good martini, that's for sure.
Brian knows
thanks again. As David and Jeff alluded, I'm Jason Robideaux. I'm the winemaker here at Clos LaChance. A little bit about myself. I've been with Clos for just over 15 years now. Prior to that, I made wine down in Australia for a small little winery called Rosemount Estate. And then prior to that, I bounced around a little bit. I've made some wine down in the Paso Robles area, up in Sonoma, and got my winemaking degree from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo here in California. So I've had a chance to bounce around the industry a little bit, bounce around the world, and make wine in different parts of the world, different parts of California, which has really helped, grow my career, but grow, as David said, my winemaking style and, what I want to express here at Clos LaChance and what I want to showcase in the wines that you guys are going to be tasting tonight. So excited to be here. Actually made it this time. I think it was the last time we had a crazy windstorm, rainstorm here in California, and the power went out about 10 minutes before I was going to get on. And being out in the country, there wasn't very good cell service, so the Wi-Fi was down. I didn't have cell service. I had to drive somewhere to get on. And funny enough, it's 75 degrees today, beautiful and perfect. And I thought, no way the power could go out. Nothing could go wrong this time. And about 2 hours ago, out of nowhere, the power just dropped in the winery. And I went, of course, the one day when it's perfect weather, the power goes out. But luckily, it was only out for about 10 minutes and came right back on. So we're here. So a little bit about Clos LaChance before we dive into the first wine. Clos LaChance is a family-owned and operated winery here in the Central Coast of California, which nowadays is a pretty rare thing as more and more family-owned wineries keep getting snatched up by bigger companies, and the number of family-owned wineries seem to be shrinking in California. So we're a rare commodity, but it actually started as a small 3/4 acre Chardonnay vineyard in the owners, Bill and Brenda Murphy's backyard. It was a hobby. They were making wine. They were loving it, and quickly grew and decided that, hey, this is something that they could do full time. They started planting small little vineyards throughout the Santa Cruz Mountains in their friends' backyards and anywhere they could find a plot of land, and it grew and grew and grew. And they finally decided, okay, this is a little bit more than a passion. We've got to turn this into a real thing. And at that time, they found the chunk of land that we're on now in the Santa Clara Valley. The town is San Martin. We're just about 10 miles east of the Pacific Ocean as the crow flies. There's a big Santa Cruz mountain range in between us, but the valley itself ended up being a perfect partnership because of the history in this valley. It's actually one of the oldest wine growing grape regions in the state of California. Back pre-prohibition, the mission systems had grapes planted up and down this valley. And that being so, the land that we have now was actually zoned agriculture specifically for wine grapes due to the historic to the history in the valley. And they got lucky just by happenstance. Met some folks that were planning to build a resort, a golf course, and because of the zoning of the area, they needed a partner that was going to grow the grapes. And so the partnership was born. We planted just under 150 acres of estate grapes here on the property, and have been farming it ever since. That was in 1999-2000 when they started construction, and been producing wines out of this valley ever since. So just a little snippet of the background of the winery and myself, but we'll kind of sprinkle in a lot more of the history of the valley, a lot more of our state property, and all things about Clos LaChance as we get through these wines. But we're here to taste some wines, so I say we jump into the first one, and I think we've got our Estate Sauvignon Blanc up first. We do have 18 different varietals on the property, so we have a lot of tools, a lot of players, a lot of blenders to play with. But some of the wines that we produce are 100% varietal, and that's because the varietal itself is Rockstar, or the vintage itself was a really great one. And we don't want to step on the grapes, as David said. We kind of want to let the grapes themselves tell the story and be the star of the show. And that's the case for our Estate Sauvignon Blanc that you guys are tasting now. It is 100% Sauvignon Blanc. We do have some other white varietals, Semillon, Viognier, Marsanne on the property. And in some years, depending on what we're working with and what we got out of the vineyard, we might play around a little bit with some blending, maybe a little bit of Semillon, which is pretty classic. But in this case, this particular vintage, we didn't want to take anything away from the Sauvignon Blanc itself. It was, beautiful vintage for the varietal. Yields were good. Quality was good. It was kind of the Goldilocks year. And so we kept it 100% Sauv Blanc. As far as the production of the wine, we started probably about 5 or 6 years ago, kind of tweaking what we were doing in the processing and the fermentation of the Sauv Blanc. Traditionally, white grapes, especially ones that don't go through malolactic fermentation or don't go into barrel, it's strictly 100% stainless steel. Traditionally, you might do a whole cluster press. So you put the grapes, after they're hand harvested, hand sorted, you put them right in the press. You squeeze that juice off because you don't want any skin contact to pick up anything necessarily. We tweaked that a little bit. What I found from a little bit of experimentation is a little bit of skin contact, especially on the Sauvignon Blanc off of our estate, is actually really good, and it did wonders. And so we started that, and we actually destemmed the Sauv Blanc, get it into a tank, and we'll cold soak it for 24 to 48 hours, not very long. And what we're doing there is we're actually extracting just a little bit of the tannins out of the skins and out of the seeds themselves, and that adds some viscosity, that adds some body, that adds some weight, but it sort of rounds out the wine itself as well. Because traditionally a Sauvignon Blanc, it can be crisp, it can be light, it can be sort of a pass-through wine, not much happening, but adding a little bit of that skin contact actually gives it a little bit more depth, a little bit more complexity. So while it's still very much California style, it's very light, it's very elegant. Citrus, pineapple, some tropical fruits. What we're getting out of those skins themselves is actually adding some weight and some depth and some length to the palate itself. So it's not just a watery kind of, afterthought of a Sauvignon Blanc. It actually has some oomph. It has something to it. But with that said, it's not a Chardonnay. It's not a big oaky type of wine being stainless steel. It's still going to be that classic Sauvignon Blanc style, but we're just adding a little bit extra oomph to the wine itself. So after we've got it cold soaked, we then get it in, we get it pressed off. We now have the juice in tank, and we'll chill it down to probably about 40 degrees or so, and we'll let it settle. And that'll let all the lees, all the thick, pulp settle out of it. And then we'll take that clean juice from the top. That's the good free run, really clean juice. And we'll start the fermentation on that. Fermentation takes up to 30 days in some cases, because we ferment it at a very low temperature. And what we're doing there is we're trying to preserve all the natural esters and the flavors and the aromatics that are in the wine, that if the fermentation gets too warm, those will just volatilize and blow off. So what we're trying to do is kind of keep all that in there. So it's actually a really long and arduous fermentation process, but what we're doing is preserving that fresh, crisp, aromatic and flavor that you come to expect from a classic California style Sauvignon Blanc. And then, as I said, 100% aged and fermented in stainless steel. So it spends the rest of its life in the stainless steel tank before we get it filtered, cleaned up, and off into bottle. And as I said, what you can expect from this wine is really bright citrus, lemon, lime, some lime rind, a little bit of tropical notes, maybe a little bit of pineapple, guava. But what you typically see in other world Sauvignon Blanc, so you won't see here, is it's not really grassy. It doesn't have really that vegetal green characteristic. It's more of your classic Central Coast California style, where it's really bright citrus and fruity.
So those big green grass, your New Zealand Sauv Blancs that have that over the top, is that a function of where it's being grown, or the winemaking techniques, or both? Because obviously you have your traditional French style Sancerre, Pouilly Fumé, and then you have New Zealand, and you have California seems to have its own distinct style.
Yeah. A lot of it is the terroir and the soil and the really cool temperatures you get in New Zealand, which you see across all grape varietals. You'll see pyrazines and some of the other natural flavor components that are in grapes as they're growing. In warmer climates like Central Coast of California, those will start to decrease as the grape gets ripe. And so in the cooler areas where you don't have the warm temperatures, those don't really decrease. The grape still gets ripe, but you don't see that decrease on the other end. So a lot of it comes actually from the region, the soil and the way that they're growing it there. Good question.
Rabbit hole question, especially when he uses big words like pyrazines.
Well, it's not talked about a lot, and we definitely don't have to go into it tonight. But Sauvignon Blanc is definitely one of those grapes that Sauvignon Blanc is an umbrella for a family of clones, and they do express very differently. Some of them kick out much more pyrazines, and pyrazines are those, like the sweet jalapeno skin that we get out of New Zealand. But yeah, clonal expression on Sauvignon Blanc is definitely noticeable.
Yeah, we had a few other clones on our property as well that we've recently budded over. But one, as David was saying, one specific one is the musky clone, which almost has like how can I put it?
I always find like a Meyer lemon kind of component to it. It's like just got like this softer mid palate. The citrus components are not as bracing. At least that's my experience.
It's got more of the floral, almost closer to a Viognier or something that's a little bit more floral than your traditional Sauvignon Blanc.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of people use that clone for the fancy, expensive Sauvignon Blancs.
Is this a single clone, or is it multi clone?
This is a single clone.
Okay. Are most winemakers opting for that route in California, or are there some wineries that are kind of messing around with different clones to have a broader expression?
Yeah, I think it's kind of all over the place. I think you get a best of both worlds. I think depending on the winery and the style and the market you're going for, you can really play around with a lot of these and get some really different wines. But I think having more of a focused approach from my side of things and knowing what I'm going to get and understanding the grape itself without tinkering too much, I think lends to a little bit cleaner and better Sauvignon Blanc, which is quite different from a lot of the other varietals where it's, you know, the complete opposite. You want as many different clones and as many different things playing in the sandbox together, so you can kind of get some different expressions and some different complexities to the wines.
I find it so interesting how much in the last like 3 years, Sauvignon Blanc has just exploded in popularity. I think like historically, a lot of people struggled with the fact that it's got a very bracing character. You know, it's very stout in its expression, you know, but at the same time, you know, I think people are really starting to embrace how much Sauvignon Blanc does offer a lot of character, and it does it without the oak.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you're seeing it, you know, across the market, across the country. And you'll see it in wine publications and articles and postings all over, that there's this huge run on Sauvignon Blanc, and it's now hard to find some. You know, grape growers are selling it out like crazy, and if you're looking for a good grower, they're already contracted out for years because people are gravitating towards it. So it's a tough varietal to get a hold of on the winery and the vineyard side as well.
In the realm of varietals, is it tough to grow?
What was that?
Is it tough to grow when compared to other varietals, or no?
No, not really. It's a weed. I mean, it's one of those varietals that wants to grow. You can, you know, minimally water it. You can kind of leave it alone. You can let it get vigorous, and, you know, let the shoots kind of go crazy, and it's happy. So it's one of those easier ones to grow, actually.
Set it and forget it.
Set it and forget it, exactly.
So awesome.
I love that you do skin contact on this one. That is very cool. It's very cool.
Yeah, it was something I was scared to play around with, you know, early on. And, you know, I started doing little batches and tinkering and toying around with it, and they just kept coming out better and better and better. Yeah, it's fun. It adds that depth.
Yep, for sure.
Awesome. Next wine, the rosé. Is that what we're on to?
Yep.
Awesome.
So what you guys have here is our Colibri Rosé. You'll see that it is a little bit different label than the rest of the wines. This was a fun one. We had made rosés several years in the past. We stopped making it because the rosé market would go down. Then we'd start making it again, and we would toy around with the style, a really dark, bigger rosé, a really light rosé. And, you know, as the rosé market started to gain some traction 5, 6, 10 years ago, we wanted to settle on a brand that was a little more, you know, upscale, elegant for the rosé market, because rosé tends to have kind of that, you know, a little bit lower price point, a little bit lower on in the market sort of idea in the consumer's head. And so we gave it this really tall hawk bottle, which is really classic. We did the silk screen on it, and we decided, you know, let's give it its own identity. Let's give it a name. And you'll see kind of throughout our brand on all of our other labels, the hummingbird, kind of our theme, our mascot. And Colibri actually is French for hummingbird. So we thought it's a nod to France. It's a nod to the old world. It gives it this, you know, elegance and this name and this separation, but it's also kind of that little kickback, that little nod back to Clos LaChance and the parent brand, and, you know, where it came from. And you'll see on the bottle, it says by Clos LaChance. So it's, you know, it's us, you know, it's an extension of our estate line that we want to make sure is connected to the brand, but it sort of separates it and gives it its own place in the world and its own identity. And the wine itself, it's funny, actually, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, when we decided to kind of go back in this direction, the owner's wife and their 2 daughters went to France for a vacation. And this was just before harvest. It was probably summertime. And they came back and they put 3 bottles of rosé on my desk. And they said, "We want you to make that." And I said, "Well, we're not exactly in Provence. We're not in France, but I'll do my best." And so that was kind of my guiding light. That was the direction we were going for. And it kind of showcases through, as you guys taste this, it's that really light, almost opaque style of rosé, to where it's full dry, as you'll see. So there's no sugar in it, but it's it's just soft and elegant, and it's not sharp and edgy and acidic, and it's just a much more classic style of rosé, to where it's something you could sit on the porch and you could have a glass of, and it's, you know, it's not the main focus, it's not the topic of conversation, it's just what you're enjoying, it's part of the moment. And that's really, you know, the what we were going for, but it's also a nod to the varietals that we're using in the rosé itself. So it's a Grenache based rosé. As I said, we have all those varietals on our property. We have several Rhone varietals: Grenache, Cinsault, Carignan, and so we wanted to use those varietals because that's really what classic rosé should be. And so it's a Grenache based. We do have a little bit of Cinsault, and actually I think it's about 2%, a little bit of Pinot Noir in there. And it's made in a very old world classic style using a technique that's called saignée, which is French for to bleed. So what we do is we bring in the base wine Grenache grapes, and we'll treat those like a traditional Sauvignon Blanc. So those will go straight into the press. We'll squeeze off the juice, and even though they're a red grape, when you press them right away, the juice that's inside is almost clear. It's almost like a white wine. And so we'll get that pressed off and into tank, get it cleaned up and ready for fermentation. But what we'll do with the other portion, so a little bit of Cinsault, a little bit of Grenache, and a little bit of Pinot Noir, we'll take those from a base red wine production. We'll let them do their traditional 3, 4, 5-day cold soak once they've been destemmed and intake to make red wine. And before we start that fermentation, we'll saignée, or bleed off, some of that juice that now has a little bit of the tannins, it has the great color, it has some of the flavors and the aromatics that are coming off of what we're going to make the base red wine. And then we'll add that back, and that's what's going to give it that color. Because if you just press it off and you just ferment it and leave it like that, it basically comes out as a white wine. So utilizing just a small percentage, and I mean, it's anywhere from 4 to 8% or so is the saignée portion. So it's a very small portion, and that's what gives it that really light color, and why it's almost see-through or clear like a white wine. And we'll add that back, and that gives it its color. And then we'll start the fermentation together, and we'll let those kind of play and mix and start the fermentation process, and do essentially the same thing like with the Sauvignon Blanc. So 100% stainless steel, really cold temperatures, really long fermentation, maintaining all those really good aromatics and flavors. And once it's done, finished up, clean it up and get it into bottle as fast as you can, because there's no aging needed on a light rosé like this. You want to get it fresh and crisp and right into the bottle. With this one, you're going to see really classic rosé notes. So you're going to get some melon, you're going to get some light strawberry, you're going to get some, you know, maybe a hint of a little bit of citrus in there as well. But the palate's going to be a little bit smoother. It's not going to be as sharp, not going to be as harsh. It's going to be more of that longer, wider style on your palate as far as the flavors.
Do you remember the wines they put on your desk as inspirations, what they were?
I don't remember. I'm trying to think.
You said 3 bottles. Was it the same wine or 3 different wines?
It was 3 different bottles.
From this, obviously they're in southern France, so
yeah, exactly.
Okay. I was just curious, one of those like, all right, let's pull those bottles and compare, right? No pressure,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Let's see how you did.
Yeah, see how you did. And then you said, so you do the blend, and so you co-ferment the blend then, right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's you know, most blends. I mean, that's something that's different unless you are in, you know, southern France, Rhone, where they do co-fermented wines. Most blends don't go that process, right? Most blends are separately fermented, and then you blend them together to get the flavor profile that you want.
Absolutely. So that's, you know, a traditional blend, you know, whether on the white side or the red side or a rosé, a traditional blend, you kind of take your pieces and your players once they're done, because you want to see what they have. But what we've found is actually fermenting them together. It lets them kind of come together, and then all those, you know, tannins and color pigments and things that you're getting from the saignée portion, it interacts with what you have in the base. And so it's actually, you know, breaking up these chains and adding these extra aromatics and flavor compounds, because they're able to bond and they're able to kind of play around with each other, versus essentially fermenting one portion just like you would a red wine, and then fermenting one like you would a white wine, and then blending them together. It's to me, it's, you know, in my head, you know, it's like taking a glass of Sauvignon Blanc and a glass of Merlot and dumping them together. They're not going to play well together at all. So it's kind of the same idea is you want them to start together, start their life together, interact, get all those things bonded and everything happy, and then let them ferment.
With going the co-fermentation route, I mean, is that a little bit more stressful because you don't know sort of the sum of the parts?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, it's a style we've managed for a while now, and we have, you know, tweaked kind of year in and year out, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less of a percentage, and depending on what the vintage is giving us, you know, whether the sugars were really low on the base portion or the sugars were really high on the Saunier portion. We do tweak it a little bit, but it's not a perfect science. So there's no wrong answer. Even if we get it finished up and I go, oh, that's just a touch darker than I was hoping for, or oh, it's really light this year, it's still a beautiful wine, and it's a living, breathing beast, and you let it be.
I mean, rosés are, I mean, they're still killing the market. I mean, people, it's, you know, I remember 7, 8, 10 years ago when we put a rosé in our wine club as a secondary red, because legally it is a red wine. And we get a lot of pushback. I think we beat the curve. You know, it was one of those things like it had blown up on the East Coast, West Coast. They hadn't quite met us in the Midwest. You know, nowadays, it was actually a wine made by Bonnie Doon, by Randall Graham, that he made specifically for us. And, you know, fast forward how many more years, and rosés are still growing strong. And you know, everybody and their brother are making them, including John Bon Jovi. So.
Yep. Yeah, if you went to you know, your standard chain or grocery store 10 years ago, the rosé section was this big, and now it's this big.
Yep. And the diversity, like you said, the diversity of the different styles from the different regions, even from classic regions, you know, in France and otherwise, are and can be drastically different. So it's nice to see some very elegantly made Southern French style ones coming out of California as well.
Absolutely.
Chardonnay, I think.
Chardonnay. So you'll see a couple of wines in our portfolio actually aren't from our estate. They're not on our property here. For one simple fact that where we are, we're in the valley, it gets pretty warm here. And while we have the really great coastal influence, as I said, the ocean's just right on the other side of the mountains. During the summer, I mean, I come in the mornings and the fog is still kind of crept over the mountain, and there's still fog sitting in the valley. And so it's cool. It's, you know, 60 degrees, 55 degrees in the morning in peak summer, but it ramps up quick. And by the time you get to midday, early afternoon, you know, now we're well into the 90s. We touch 100 occasionally. And so that's not quite ideal for growing Chardonnay and growing Pinot Noir. Traditionally, they like cooler environments. They like cooler climates. They like mountains. They like coastal ranges. And, you know, when we planted this vineyard and we made our decisions throughout the years as far as this varietal's in, this varietal's out, you know, we said, hey, we're 20 minutes north of Monterey County, which is one of the best wine grape or Chardonnay grape growing regions in the world. Why would we try to do something that we're not built to do when we can go down the road and work with some really great vineyards, some really great partners, some really great wineries down there, and source some of the best Chardonnay in the world? And so that's what we've done. Monterey County, it's big, so it ranges all the way to the valley where it's warm, just like here. But it also has the mountain range. It has some of the coastal areas, and so it's much more conducive to growing the Chardonnay grape. And what we were really looking for in a Chardonnay, especially from Monterey, is to showcase the fruit, express the fruit, and show off what Monterey County Chardonnay can really be. And so what you'll see with this, while it is a traditional California style, being that it has oak and, you know, is a bigger style of Chardonnay, we definitely have not gone to that end of the spectrum. You know, kind of keeping with the theme of talking 10, 15 years ago, the market had kind of swung away from the big oakies. Everybody was doing naked. Everybody was doing stainless steel Chardonnays. And it's kind of snapped back, but it hasn't snapped all the way back. Of course, there's your, you know, big, giant, sweet oak bomb, handful of popcorn Chardonnays out there. And there's plenty of consumers for those. They love them, and rightfully so. If that's your style, great. But that's not what we wanted to showcase. We didn't want to showcase a handful of popcorn and an oak stave. So with the production of the Chardonnay, it's made in a very traditional style. So it's whole cluster pressed. We get it off into tank. We let it settle and clarify like the other whites. But in this case, it's actually barrel fermented. So we'll start the fermentation. We'll get it kicked off, and as soon as the fermentation starts, we get it into barrel and we start the fermentation in that way. What we try to do in this style is we utilize a lot less new oak. So we're anywhere from 30 to 35% on a given year of new French oak. The rest is neutral French oak. So it's not your big giant traditional California Chard that's just an oak bomb, but being a Chardonnay that lends well to playing with oak and absorbing those oak tannins and getting some of those almond and nutty characteristics and vanilla that you're going to get from the oak. We just want to tone that back a little bit so we can make sure that we are showcasing the fruit. The Monterey County Chardonnay is known for its minerality and some of its more slaty and rocky granite kind of characteristics, but also has really great fruit, the really great stone fruits and peach and nectarine and green apple and all of these great flavor profiles that you're going to get naturally out of the grape. We don't want those to get stepped on by the oak itself. So the oak is there more of adding some tannins, adding some weight, adding a little bit of that grittiness to the wine, but it's not going to completely knock out all of those great aromatics and all of those flavors where if you stuck your nose in and all you smell is oak and you go, oh, that's another oaky Chard. So you're going to get the oak, you're going to get the presence of it, especially on the mouth. You're going to get kind of that toastiness and a little bit of that oaky feel, but you're going to get a lot more of the aromatics as far as the fruit characteristics and some of the minerality that's natural in the Monterey County Chardonnay. So it's a lot of people consider it kind of that bridge Chardonnay. So it's in between your stainless steel, no oak, naked, and your big sweet oak bombs over here. It's kind of that one in between that kind of both sides of the table can kind of agree on and come back to and say, oh yeah, that's a Chardonnay that I can drink. So, and as you'll see, either on this or maybe on some of the materials, that we did just get a 91 points in Wine Enthusiast on this one. So we're pretty happy with how this Chardonnay came out.
One of the things that I always find interesting, and specifically, you can be not very far geographically from one location to a next, and the specific geology and the mountain range can drastically influence which grape varietals do better here versus there. Can you speak a little bit about the geography with Monterey and the coastal influences and how that draws up the temperature to make essentially a cool climate grape be able to thrive in what would otherwise be a hot area?
Yeah, absolutely. Without necessarily a map in front of me or on the screen, so the Santa Cruz Mountain Range kind of comes down the coast, basically from San Francisco, and then once you hit just below Santa Cruz itself, there's a valley. It's called Salinas Valley, and it opens up straight to the middle of the Monterey Bay, and that valley is where essentially the fog naturally sits. So that coastal area, if you go to Santa Cruz, it's always sunny. If you go to Monterey, which is the bottom of the Monterey Bay, it's always foggy. And so that fog layer kind of sits there. And the only place for it sort of to leak to, because you have this big Santa Cruz mountain range and another big mountain range, it kind of funnels right in between there. And so as I was saying, where we are, we get kind of that fog that kind of creeps over the mountains and it kind of sits in our little valley here. It dissipates quick. Whereas Monterey County sits directly in the Salinas Valley. So that fog goes down the valley and it just sits there and it lives there for a much longer period of time during the day, and even lingers for some days the entire day to where the sun doesn't come out. And so what that does, while it is a valley, we're in the Santa Clara Valley, sort of up here, the Salinas Valley, where most of Monterey County is, that fog layer just creeps down there and it just sits there a little bit longer. And it gives it less time for the afternoon for it to warm up. So the temperatures don't quite get to where we necessarily see them, especially when you get closer to the mountain range or the east side of the mountains there. And you're up kind of on the hillside. It takes a little bit longer, being that it's east facing, and it doesn't get the afternoon sun. I had to think about that for a minute. It's east facing, so it doesn't get the afternoon sun. It goes over to the mountains, so it doesn't have that time between the fog and then losing the sun in the afternoon to really heat up. And it's just really conducive to a cooler climate grape.
Yeah, you're starting to see Santa Lucia Highlands and some of the other regions with, really good Pinot Noirs and other Chardonnays. I mean, it's got, and the other great thing, I mean, obviously this doesn't have the sub AVA on it, but I think the tech sheet talks about the sub region as consumers are starting to get more educated on everything that's not Napa. We're starting to see more and more wineries be willing to list and recognize the importance of listing some of these different sub AVAs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, now that they're growing more and more, and we're adding new sub AVAs as more areas become recognized. But Monterey County is, I mean, it has tons of them, but it's really well known for those, whether it's Arroyo Seco or Santa Lucia Islands or some of the other regions. That it's definitely something that's gaining traction in the market, like you said, that people are starting to recognize it and understand where these regions are and where the wines are coming from. That it gives it more of a sense of place. It's, oh no, it's not just Monterey County, it's actually coming from Arroyo Seco, which is right over here.
Yep. Awesome. So I think we're going to pivot to the Pinot Noir. So we're going to go much further south, right? But another kind of cool area that has some geology that impacts it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Geography.
So yeah, kind of right in line with the Chardonnay, the Pinot Noir. Again, a little too warm where we are, and so we actually recently added this wine to the portfolio probably 2 or 3 years ago, because of the exact region, or the exact reason that, okay, if we don't have it here on our property, we want to make sure that we're doing it right. We want to make sure we're getting good stuff. We have good partners. We're working with the vineyards that we want to work with. And so we scoured. We spent a lot of time in Monterey County trying to figure out where the right spot would be. And just nothing came back to really match what we were looking for this portfolio. And so we went further south, as Jeff was just saying. And we're working in really 2 specific regions year in and year out, and that's the Santa Maria Valley and Santa Barbara County. Most of you probably know Santa Barbara, well, kind of newer in the world, I guess, of wine, past 20, 30 years. It's really well known for its Pinot Noir, and rightfully so. I mean, it's very similar to sort of a Santa Cruz Mountain vibe, as far as where a lot of the grapes are grown down in Santa Barbara. You have your little coastal town that has the mountain range. It kind of comes up, a lot of foothills. A lot of the grapes are kind of in the foothills of the mountains there. So you get similar aspects as far as temperature swings, kind of the diurnal temperature swing, where it's warm, it's cold, it's warm, it's cold, kind of depending on if the fog layer is going to sit in for a week or if the fog layer is going to be gone for a couple of weeks. And so it's kind of a similar vibe and a similar setup to the Santa Cruz Mountains, which we know really well, being that we're in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains. They're grapes that I've worked with for 15, 20 years in this area. We have some small vineyards up there that we do some really small lot stuff just for the tasting room and direct sales. So we've worked with that type of grape for a long time. Well, Santa Barbara can be quite a bit different from Santa Cruz. The growing of the grapes themselves, the timelines as far as, when we need to start looking at pruning, when we need to start looking at harvest, and all those same aspects, we're really familiar with. So we decided to go all the way down there and start looking for some really, really good fruit, really good juice. And Santa Barbara, as far as kind of the general overview, as far as what you're tending to see with the wine itself versus some of the other regions, it's just a little bit more of a wine that has oomph without tannin, is kind of the way I like to describe it, because what you're always going to get is a much wider mouthfeel. You're going to get a much longer wine. You're going to get a little bit more weight. You're going to get the really juicy, jammy style of Pinot Noir, but you don't get the tannins with it. You don't get the heaviness. You don't get what you would see with a Syrah or maybe a bigger varietal wine, which is one reason I love working with the Pinot Noir grape. And that's pretty different from a lot of the other regions, especially you get up, Napa and, Sonoma and some of the northern regions. You get that jamminess and you get some of those big characteristics, but you get the tannin with it. You get a lot more of the weight. You're usually extracted a little bit more. And so they typically can be a bigger style. Santa Cruz Mountains, really well known for its earthiness, and it's dirty, and it's mushroom, and it's a little bit less fruit. It has grittiness to it, which is a style I love to make and I love to drink myself. And so Santa Barbara is kind of that middle ground. While it's not as earthy and it doesn't have really the dirtiness that Santa Cruz Mountains can kind of have, it has a little bit more of just that width and that body, and that, feel like you're drinking a little bit more of a wine than a really light style of Pinot. And so what we do in fermentation and in aging is kind of complement that and play with it. Since we've got the juiciness and we've got the jammy and the fruit already in it, we can go a little bit more on the oak side, not necessarily the toast or the heaviness of the barrel itself, the seasonings. We can go a little bit lighter on those, but we can go with a little bit more new oak, because the tannins, especially the oak tannins that are kind of that grittiness that you might get from a different region, they're just going to complement that fruit that you already have there. So it adds a little bit of that tannic weight to it that's not naturally there in the grape, which gives it a little bit of dryness and gives it a little bit more of a feel to the wine. But again, kind of like the Chardonnay, it doesn't step on the fruit because the fruit's already there. The fruit's so present. It's predominant as far as the aromatics that you're going to get, the flavor profile that you're going to get. So it just adds this kind of undertone that you don't necessarily pick up on. You don't necessarily taste a Pinot Noir generally, but especially this one, you don't necessarily taste it and go, that's kind of oaky, or that's got a smokiness, or so we want that to still be an undertone, but you kind of sense that it's there as far as taste. You get that little bit of, okay, this has a little something else going on. There is a little bit of weight. There is a little bit of tannin that I feel coming through without that toasty almond or toasted kind of characteristic that you're going to have in it.
Yeah, I mean, I love this region for California Pinot Noirs. It's not the overstated, northern coast that you kind of get in some of the varietals, and it's again has some pretty cool towns. We had the pleasure, I think, a long time ago, 10 years ago now, I think we did our convention there. I think we stayed in Solvang.
Oh yeah,
cool little hip town. We stayed at the hotel there. It's got that old the windmills and everything else. We visited a bunch of different wineries, and we learned a lot about, obviously Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, but then you get up further into the valley towards Happy Canyon. It gets warmer, and you're starting to see, your Shiraz and things like that. And there's just a lot of cool little wineries down there. God, what's the one we went to that was in it's not named in the movie, but it's the one that they used for the movie, Sideways.
Yeah, Sideways one.
Yeah, I can't think of it. So it's just a great little place to visit. Some great wines coming out of there as well. I'm a huge Pinot Noir fan, so you're never gonna sort of steer me away from Pinot Noir with this. So.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah,
and it's, I mean, from a winemaker's perspective, it's finicky. It's a tough wine to make. You were asking about growing Sauvignon Blanc or some of these other varietals. Pinot Noir might be one of the hardest varietals to produce, simply because it has such a delicate aspect to it, and you don't want to over extract it, and you don't want to oxidize it, and you don't want to do too much, and you don't want to do all these things. And so many times we've done some of these small batch or small lot Pinot Noirs, and if you blink or you forget about it for 10 minutes, it comes back to bite you in the final product. So it's a tough one to make, but as a winemaker, I think that's a little bit more rewarding. Maybe why I love making it so much, because you understand when you can produce a really nice one and people enjoy it, that there's a little bit more of a pat on the back to that one, because it's something that you have to pay so much attention to during production.
So with wines like this, where you're not growing the grapes, talk to me a little bit about the partnership, the vineyard management, how that sort of interchange takes place to ensure the grapes that you're getting are up to your standards.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just work directly with them. A lot of these cases, whether it's a year by year basis or year by year contract, or it's a long term. You start from the beginning before you sign anything, before you make any decisions. You start with, okay, well, let's taste some of the wines you've made from this property before. Let's start there. Then you go, okay, well, talk to me about a little bit of your farming practices. How much are you watering? What kind of, pest management are you doing? What kind of fertilizer? Can I see a soil report to see what's already in the soils? And then you kind of go from there. And it's not a rigid straight line. You could have this idea in your head of, I'd really like to see them get 5 gallons of water per vine from July 1st to September 1st. And they might say, hey, we got a really high water table. We don't start watering until July 15th. Okay, great. Your vineyard. I don't know my vineyard or your vineyard as well as you do. And so you trust in the partners, and you go from there. And that's why, you know, a lot of these can be year to year things, because you can try things out. You can go and work with somebody and you can go, hey, I made a really nice wine, but maybe that's not exactly what I was looking to express in this final product. Still a beautiful wine, but maybe we'll try something down the road. Maybe we'll go a little bit higher in elevation. And so it's from long-term, you know, working with regions and growers and other winemakers, and just having that dialogue and kind of going back and forth and seeing what works for both sides and making sure that it's the right fit.
Before we go into the next wine, can we talk a little bit about the sustainability that you embody at Clos LaChance?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of the background on sustainability in the wine industry. We were actually one of the first 17 wineries in the state of California to be certified both vineyard and winery by the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance. So it's something we've been passionate about. We've been doing for a long time. We were part of the pilot program back in 2010. And so we've been certified for coming up on 13 years this year. And sustainability is, you know, kind of a buzzword you hear out there. Everybody sees it. It's sustainable fishing, it's sustainable farming, it's sustainable clothes. And really what sustainability kind of means, because people throw that word around a lot, think, oh, this is sustainable food, or, you know, what have you. Really what it encompasses is looking at, you know, kind of the umbrella, the big picture of how the company operates and interacts socially, economically, environmentally. And, you know, the big difference, especially in the wine industry, when people come up to me and they say, well, there's organic and there's biodynamic, and what's sustainable and what are these? You know, biodynamic, organic especially, it focuses on what goes into the soil, what goes into the grapes, and what goes into the wine. Where sustainability looks at all those. It looks at, you know, how much pesticides are you using, what pesticides are you using, you know, what kind of sulfur products are you putting into your wine, and how much are you putting into your wine. So it looks at all the same thing, but then it goes to the bigger picture. It says, how much energy are you using? How much water are you using? How do you interact with your community? How do you treat your employees? So it kind of looks at everything in the big picture. And the sustainability program, to actually get certified, it's a 237-point audit that you have to go through annually. And it looks at all these things. It looks at the fact that we have reclamation ponds. So every drop of water that comes through this facility gets used at least twice, because it goes through the facility, goes into the reclamation ponds, and then we use that to water the vineyard. So it looks at, you know, kind of all of those points. But the big thing with sustainability is you can't tread water. You can't stay put. To be certified each year continually, every year you have to get better. So you have these 237 audit points, and you have, you know, 172 of them, you have 2 points, and 84 of them, you have 3 points, and 20, you have whatever. So it looks at those, and then it says, okay, well, next year, if you had 186 that were 2 points, we need a certain percentage of those to be 3 points next year. So you have to look at what you can do. And that can be anything from reducing energy, or hosting more community events at your winery, or any of those things. So it's something that, you know, we're not only passionate about, we're one of the first wineries to be a part of this program. Each year we're getting better, and each year we're doing something to better the winery's place in the world, the winery's place in the economy, the environmental impact that we have, you know, greenhouse gas emissions, how much diesel we're using in our tractors. It literally looks at every last bit of the winery itself. And actually, David's probably heard this story, I don't know, 20 times in the last few weeks, but just recently, in the last about 2 years now, we've had a herd of sheep on our property. We have a shepherd that brings in their sheep for the winter months, and essentially it's weed control. You don't have to drive tractors. There's no greenhouse gas emissions. You're not compacting the soil with the tractors going up and down the rows. And so we have a herd of sheep. And the one thing that sheep do a lot of is reproduce. So spring hits, and all of a sudden, every day you go out to the vineyard, and there's a new lamb that was born last night. And I think this year we're up to, I don't know, 14 or 15 or so lambs off of, I think it's 60 or 70 sheep. And being where we are, we're kind of out in the country a little bit, off the beaten path. You can imagine there's a lot of predators: coyotes, mountain lions, they like baby sheep, they like lambs because they're easy picking. And so we recently added, probably about a month, 2 months ago, we added a new member of our flock to protect the sheep, and her name is Cecilia, and she is a donkey. And this is something that I've just recently learned. Apparently, donkeys will protect a flock of sheep. Coyotes, mountain lions, they don't want anything to do with a donkey, probably because they're mean and they kick and they spit and who knows what else they do. But she's become the star of the show around the property. So we have this one donkey that kind of herds the sheep around and hangs out with the sheep and sleeps with them at night, and is, I guess, their bodyguard, which is pretty fun.
We actually have a video of Cecilia if you guys would like us to share it.
You have it?
I do.
All right.
Let's see if I can do this. Share screen. Boom. Sharing. And here we go.
Cecilia. There she is.
Here she comes.
Good morning.
There she is.
He likes apples.
She likes apples.
So that's Cecilia.
That's the newest member of the Clos family.
She's amazing. She's getting a cool Instagram following.
Yes, she is. That's the way the world works now. So that's, with the sheep, Cecilia, water, energy, kind of all that. That's kind of the overview of the, the sustainability in wine and, what we're passionate about, what we're doing. You'll see it on the labels. We were recently allowed by the TTB to actually put the certification, the seal on the back label. So that's either on the bottles you have there, or they'll be rolling out very soon. So it's just something that's, while be it a buzzword and what everybody's talking about, it's still a pretty cool thing to be a part of and to be able to showcase about the winery itself.
It's got to be immensely hard when you always got to be adding to it, and there's going to be a point in time where you run out of things almost, maybe.
That's what I keep talking to the auditor about every year when they come back. I go, hey, what happens when I run out of stuff to do? Haven't got there yet, but
I'm sure they'll come up with more. So, all right, I think we're ready for
Wow.
wine number 5, the Merlot.
Yep. All right, so the Estate Merlot, something that you'll see kind of across the red. It's kind of a blanket statement. As I said, with the Chardonnay and being a Central Coast, and we don't really want to step on the fruit and overdo it, you'll kind of see a similar theme throughout the red wines that we produce. And David mentioned this kind of at the beginning when he was talking about our winemaking techniques, and we want to showcase the fruit. We want it to be varietally correct. If you pick up a Merlot, it should taste like a Merlot. If you pick up a Cab and you want a Cab, it should taste like a Cab. But what we don't try to be is Napa. We don't try to be Lodi. We don't try to be France. We know what we are on the Central Coast. We know what we can get out of the grapes that we have on the property, and we know what we want to express with those. So you'll see that they're a little bit, I use this term loosely, but a little bit softer, a little bit more elegant, a little bit more of an approachable style of red wine. They're never going to be these huge alcohol bombs. They're not going to be overly extracted and really tannic, and you feel like you're getting dried out after one glass of wine. What we want is them to be complex. We want them to be deep. We want them to be a wine that every time you go back to the glass, you kind of dig into and you go, there's something else there. I'm smelling something else. I'm tasting something else. So the complexity has to be there, and the quality has to be there, and that has to be showcased. But it's not something we're ever going to over extract, and it's never going to be this big, heavy, over the top tannic style of red wine. And the Merlot is no exception to that. One thing you'll notice with a lot of these varietals, especially on the red wine side, as I mentioned, we have 18 different varietals on our property. We have all 5 Bordeaux's. We have several Rhone varietals. As a winemaker, those are just tools in my toolbox. Dating back to the whole world, you all know you don't buy a Cabernet from Bordeaux, you buy a Bordeaux wine. And that's because they use what's on their property. They use Cab Franc, they use Petit Verdot, they use what they have. And what they put together is the best wine possible that they can make with what grapes they have. And so we utilize that same philosophy here. So while sometimes you will see some 100% varietal wines, most of the time you're going to see wines with a little bit of this, a little bit of that, because we have it. We have the opportunity to utilize those. And, you know, the Merlot is no exception. We utilize a little bit of Cab Franc, a little bit of Cab in there because Merlot has to be the star of the show. We want the really bright red fruits. We want it to be, you know, a little bit more of that fruitier style compared to your traditional Cabernets or your big Bordeaux blends. But we want to add a little bit of that Cab Franc because what that does is it tones down the fruit a little bit. So it brings in a little bit of a green, you know, bell pepper character, you know, that just adds another depth, another layer, another bit of complexity to it. And then a little bit of Cab because we want to add a little bit of weight to it. It doesn't need to be just this really light style of Merlot. We want to add what tannins we have and what we can play around with. And so we utilize those varietals in the blending. And as a winemaker, I mean, that's the fun part. That's where I get to tweak and I get to play around and I get to see what works and what doesn't work. Because there's plenty of times we'll sit at that blending table and we'll say, oh, let's try 5% of that. And put it in and go, whoa, never mind. Take that out. That did not work. Those do not play well together. And so we try to make sure that we're keeping it varietally correct, but we're adding and we're giving it all this other stuff. With the red wines that we produce on the property, all handpicked, hand sorted before it goes into the stemmer. With the fermentation itself, especially the Bordeaux varietals, Merlots, the Cabs, we look for a minimum of 4 days of cold soak before we start fermentation. Sometimes it goes a little bit longer depending on, you know, what we're getting out of the grapes, how the growing season was. Are they really thick skins? Are they going to be overly extracted? Do we need to extract them a little bit more? And so we make those decisions kind of on the fly, on the run, by tasting through and looking at the grapes and tasting the grapes and seeing what we have to work with. And then, you know, we get fermentation kicked off. We're making sure that we're taking care of the fermentation and then aging, typically 18 to 24 months, depending on, again, what we're trying to extract, what we're trying to get out of it, what we're looking for in the final product. And we utilize, say we're at probably about 90%, 85-90% of French oak in-house across all programs. And then we do utilize a little bit of American oak. American oak's just a fun little, you know, player in especially Bordeaux varietals because it has the wider grain, so it interacts much faster and it interacts much harsher than your traditional French really tight grained barrels. And so using small percentages of that, depending on the blend, depending on the varietal, you're actually going to get a little bit more of that harsher tannin extraction. You blend that back with really soft French oak tannins, and it adds that nice depth and even the tannin layer. So you have your grape tannin, you have a long chain tannin, and you have these really short chain tannins, and they kind of all play against each other to where it adds, you know, a layer and then a layer and then a layer. That's just on mouthfeel, not even aromatics or flavors or anything like that. That's just the actual perception that you're getting in your mouth. And Merlot's no exception. Merlot definitely loves to play with American oak. And so it's one of the varietals that we tend to use 5 to 10% in a given year to add that to the fruity characteristics that you're naturally going to get in a Merlot grape. And we're going to add kind of that harsher, a little bit more in your face tannin to it.
You make a good Merlot. That's actually not an easy thing to do. I think that's one of the reasons that people have prejudice against Merlots, because there's a lot of people making Merlot who should stop making Merlot. But those who make good Merlot, I mean, my preference out of Bordeaux has always been more Merlot based. And for those who have seen the movie Sideways, if anybody doesn't know, the great irony at the end of the movie is his coveted wine that he finally drinks out of the little paper cup in the burger joint is Merlot based.
That's
Merlot
right.
is a fantastic grape when it's done right. It truly is.
I agree. And it's a fun one to play with. It's also a really, really great varietal to use in blends as well. It plays well with others.
Well, I mean, the other cool thing about it is it's in between a lot of the other wines, right? You have your if you're a red wine drinker, you're either drinking Pinot Noir or Cab a lot of times, and not every occasion calls for something light and fruity and high acid, sometimes like Pinot Noir, and other days you don't want your teeth ripped off with the tannins of a cab. And so it's kind of that middle ground, which you can do many things with it and pair it with many different foods.
100%. Absolutely.
All right. Think we're ready for the next one. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
What's up next? I have my list.
We got the Heritage.
Awesome. All right.
So yeah, now getting on to, you know, the blend, the Meritage style of blend. This is the ultimate as far as, you know, playing around with your tools. When it comes to the blending process, this is, you know, probably the most fun a winemaker can have, but it's the most tedious and often frustrating because you're playing around with so many different varietals and there's so many avenues you can go down to try and figure out, you know, which direction do we want this wine to go. And so when producing, you know, the same Meritage in any of the red blends that we do year in and year out, it sort of starts with the base. So the blending process is, you know, you sit down and you look at all the players that you have. So you've got, you know, 4 cabs, you got 2 Petit Verdauxs, you got these 6 Merlots, you got a couple of Cab Francs over here, and you take them as they are one by one. So you taste through the cab and say, okay, these 4 cabs, what's this one bring to the table? What's this one bring to the table? What's this one bring to the table? What are we trying to get out of them? Okay, this one's a little bit lighter than we want for this blend. This one's kind of got some green notes that I don't think are going to play well. Take those 2 out. Let's play with these 2. And then you go through each varietal and you do the same thing. And then once you get to that point, you start tweaking with the amount of each of the varietals as far as a percentage. So, you know, typically the way I like to start is I like to go as big generic as possible. Okay, so if I'm working with these 4 varietals, I'll go 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. And right away, you'll see something. You'll say, whoa, that Cab Franc is dominating this blend. We got to back off. Or I don't get any of the Cabernet notes. We got to up that. And so then we'll start tweaking from there. So back off on the Cab Franc, add a little cab. Now we're at 50 cab. We're at 17 Cab Franc, and we're playing with the other 2. And so we'll go through that and we'll piece it out one by one by one. And we'll get to a point where we go, okay, now we've got a really nice wine we want to play with. We really like what we're working with. Now we start getting on to the minute levels and the little things here or there. So we go, okay, well, we threw out these 2 cabs over here. What happens if this 50% cab becomes 45 this one and 5% of that one that we thought was too green? And so we start bringing that back in. And so it can be quite a tedious process, but it's one that is a lot of fun to work with. You surprise yourself every time. You know, I'll start with these and I'll taste one and I'll go, oh, that one's not going to play well. And then I'll end up sneaking 7% back in and go, oh my God, that just made the blend. That little bit of green we brought back in absolutely made the blend. So it's a fun thing to go through. It can be frustrating because you can go through this whole thing and you get to the end and be like, I don't love what we made. Let's start over. But that's part of it. And that's why, you know, a lot of these blends that we come up with, like the old world and like the entire marketplace, the entire state of California. I mean, red blends are doing this. They're on an upward trend because winemakers are getting the freedom to make the wine that they want to make, put together blends that they want to put together, put them in a bottle that just says red blend. Doesn't have to say Cabernet, it doesn't have to say Merlot. And so those are some of the best wines that you're seeing coming out of the market, you know, kind of across the board. And that's why it's a upward trend as far as varietals in the marketplace. And this Meritage, you know, no doubt. And the unique thing and the fun thing that I see year in and year out is the base of it. So what's the majority of the varietal fluctuates so much depending on what we got out of the vineyard that year. And, you know, was it a good year for Petit Verdot? Was it too cold and Petit Verdot just didn't get as ripe as I wanted to get it? And so there'll be years where it's a Merlot based wine, you know, 50% Merlot. There's years where it's 60% Cab. Other years where it's, you know, 40% Petit Verdot. And it all just depends on, you know, what we're getting out of the tasting sessions and what we're actually getting out of the varietals for the final blend. And that's what makes it kind of the fun wine to make, but the fun wine to drink, because year in and year out, while we have our avenue and it's a very, very similar wine year in and year out, the components that go into making it that similar style, the similar mouthfeel, the similar aromatics kind of fluctuates quite a bit, which is a pretty cool aspect of putting together a blend like this. As I said with the Merlot, it's not going to be a bully over tannic wine. You'll see it's got a lot more oomph than the Merlot itself. It's got a lot more tannins. It's a little bit more of an earthier, a little bit dirtier style of a Meritage blend. It's not going to be a huge fruit bomb. There's not a ton of really bright red fruits. It's more of your dark, your blackberries, you know, a little bit more of your molasses and chocolate, and a little bit more of those more classic, traditional, you know, Cabernet characteristics, and a little bit more of the deeper fruits that you're going to get out of this. And then a much longer mouthfeel that you'll see much longer linger in your mouth compared to the Merlot that you guys just tasted.
And so what does Meritage mean?
You tell them, David. It's your story.
So Meritage is a official term for a wine that follows the same blending rules as Bordeaux. And the name is a blend of two words, merit and heritage. It's actually I believe that the term came about as a contest that Robert Mondavi had put out there into the world many, many, many years ago about, we need an official term for these Bordeaux style blends from California. And there was a woman somewhere who came up with the term, and eventually did become official. And we don't see enough people using that term anymore. I love the fact that Clos LaChance stays with tradition and uses the official term rather than just coming up with some proprietary name.
Yeah, it is. For some reason, it is a dying breed in the wine industry. Used to see Meritage all over the place, and you know, wine lists at a restaurant, a Meritage section, and yeah, you don't tend to see them anymore. I love it as a name. I mean,
Me too.
For one, especially, you know, nowadays, as we were saying, red blends trending in the market. If you go to the red blend section of your local wine shop, you have no idea what's in the bottle unless it says specifically on the back it's 40% Cabernet, 30% this, 20% that. You have no idea. It could be Zinfandel based, it could be Cabernet based, it could be Syrah based. You really have no idea what you're getting into. Where a Meritage, it says it right there. It's a Bordeaux style blend. You know exactly what you're getting in that bottle. It's not going to taste like Zinfandel. It's not going to taste like Syrah. It's going to taste like a Bordeaux style.
So for anybody who's unfamiliar, Bordeaux style blend means that the wine can contain up to all 5 of the Bordeaux noble grapes, and that's Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. So it can contain all 5. It doesn't have to, but it cannot be dominated by any one of them, which would allow it at that point to be varietally labeled. So it can't, what is it, Jason? It can't exceed, what, 75% of one varietal? Is that right?
Actually, 65.
65. There you go.
Yeah, so it has to contain at least 3 of the varietals, and can't be more than 65% of one of those varietals, is the official Meritage rules.
There you go. Yeah, and Jason's absolutely right. It's one of the things that's troubling is, people moving away from Meritage means that you walk into a wine shop or look at a wine list and, you don't see that Meritage term, and somebody might be making a Bordeaux style blend, but they've given it a proprietary name and you don't know what's in that unless you know the wine. The Meritage, it needs to come back. We're bringing it back. We're creating a renaissance here.
Not that this is about other wineries, but what are some of the other wineries that are still kind of using it, or you see that have embraced it?
That's a good question. Who is still
trying to think off the top of my head if I've seen any recently.
We went somewhere. I think we went in California somewhere for convention. We did a blending class, and I'm thinking of the company that makes the Mariner.
Robert Mondavi still makes Meritage.
Okay.
Let's see. Well, that's kind of a controversial one. We won't mention it. King Family Vineyards.
I think Dry Creek might still make one.
Estancia still makes a Meritage. Let's see here. Dry Creek Vineyards makes a Meritage.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Do you guys do blending classes when people come? Is that something that's an option for people that are visiting?
Yeah, absolutely. We do public blending seminars and blending classes. I do quite a bit of them when we have guests come that request it with a winemaker or distributors or sales reps or clients but yeah, We definitely do.
That's always a fun process, especially when you get paired in teams and then you have a winner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody likes to have a winner.
Everybody likes that.
Not competing. So awesome. Well, I think we should finish with our last wine. Having more wines than we normally have. We knew we were going to run a little bit late, but we definitely don't want to skimp on our time with this one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So our estate Cabernet, definitely the flagship of our Clos LaChance brands, both estate brands in the market, as well as, you know, some of the small lot stuffs that we do here at the winery for wine club and direct to consumer. It is the most widely planted varietal on our property, so we have the most acreage of it. And what's pretty unique about what we have here, and a little bit about the setup of the winery. So as I said, we come off of the eastern foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains there, but as we run down away from the mountains, we're in a valley, as I was saying, the historic valley that used to grow wine grapes, and we're kind of pitted in between two hillsides. And so a majority of our vineyard kind of runs along one of the hillsides, it goes up the hillside, and then we're kind of perched on a slope where the winery itself is, and surrounding the winery itself is vineyards as well, kind of cascading away from the winery. And in several different locations within the vineyard and surrounding the winery are different Cabernet grapes, different Cabernet clones, and different Cabernet rootstock that we use. So given that we have so many different setups, we have high up on the hillside, we have down on the valley floor, we have kind of undulating off here in really rocky soils. We have a lot of different Cabernets to play around with. And speaking of clonal differences, as we were talking with the Sonoma block, Cabernet is one of those, absolutely. And it shows in so many different ways. Clones can vary in berry size. You can get just the tiniest little BB size grapes that are just, you know, super small. You can get a little bit bigger ones. You can get really long, loose clusters. You can get a little bit tighter, shorter clusters. And it all depends on the clone. And what you're going to get from those different grapes are exponentially different. So, you know, really, really tiny BB size grapes, they're going to have a really low juice to skin ratio. So you're going to have a lot more skin surface, a lot more skin contact in the fermenter, versus a big juicy berry. There's going to be a lot more juice to skin contact. So one's going to give you this really extracted, really tannic, really heavy style of Cabernet. One's going to give you a little bit lighter, not quite as extracted, not as many tannins. You're going to get a lot more of the fruit because you're pulling all of those flavor compounds out of the pulp itself. And so what we do with all of those, and we have all these different players, you know, one thing that I like to do with most of our varietals and most of our different blocks and clones is keep them separate. So let's get them fermented separate. Let's get them off of fermentation. Let's get them into barrel, and let's let them calm down a little bit. And let's dive in and see what we're working with. So let's see, you know, what block 3 did versus block 23 versus the Whitestone. And then you have, you know, 4 different clones that you put on the table. And so what we can do with those is then, again, play around at the blending table and say, okay, this one's really heavily extracted. We're going to have to be careful. That one's going to have to be a little bit in this blend, a little bit in this blend, a little bit in this blend. And then we're going to bring in some of that other Cabernet to kind of round out the final estate Cabernet blend. But like with the Merlot and a lot of the other varietals, it's not going to be the only player in the game, in the match. We're going to utilize Merlot, Malbec, Petit Verdot. We have all these really awesome varietals, these Bordeaux that we can play around with. So Cabernet is going to have, you know, your classic Cabernet notes, your classic Cabernet style, but adding a little Merlot to give it a little more fruit, adding some Petit Verdot to lift up the florals and give it a little bit more tannins. Those are all things that we can add, that we can, you know, kind of round out the final Cabernet blend. But I mean, Cabernet of all grape varietals, of all wines, a Cabernet drinker is a Cabernet drinker. I mean, you guys all know that. I'm sure there's some Cabernet drinkers in the listening in right now, but if you're going to grab a bottle of Cabernet, it's got to taste like Cabernet. It can't taste like Syrah. It can't taste like Cab Franc. It's got to have those characteristics that you're looking for, the weight you're expecting. It's going to stand up to the food that you're preparing. And so that's a huge thing for us. And so Cabernet will always kind of be the star of the show. It'll be the dominating characteristic, but utilizing the other flavors are going to just add to the complexity and add to the final blend. And I believe this one, I got it here, is about 80% cab, about 15% Merlot, about 5% Malbec. So, you know, utilizing that Merlot adds a little bit of that red fruit, but Malbec's a really fun one to play around with because it's blueberry and it's jammy, and it can even sometimes have a little spice characteristic to it. So it's these black fruits of cab and these red fruits of Merlot and this little bit of blueberry you get from Malbec, and you kind of put them all together. It really rounds it out and gives it all that different complexity and those layers and all that fun stuff to dig into when you're having a glass of cab.
I'm going to ask you the hardest question. Which one do you like the most?
Can't ask me that. Can't ask me that. I can tell you which one I drink the most.
Okay.
That would be
The wit? You broke up.
the rosé.
Oh, the rosé. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it's one of those that's easy to drink, and you know, I mean, a lot of people are drinking tons of rosé right now.
Yeah,
So.
and that's just, it's such an easy one. A hot summer day, you go home, you're tired, pour a glass of rosé.
Yep, might have to do that. So, well, I'll tell you what. I mean, this has been a great little tasting to learn a little bit more about, obviously, where you guys started, where you are now. Certainly with the conservation efforts and sustainability, but most importantly, you know, having a great time trying some amazing wines. David, remind me, are these in our markets, are these available all the time? Are these things that we need to special order? What if we run out, I guess, is our question. Or he's gone, he left. Is he not here?
Right here.
Okay.
No, so in Iowa, these wines are fully supported, local distribution, so you guys have good access to the wines. Now, as we go into some of the different states, we are in the midst of a little bit of a change. So Chicago's a pretty difficult environment right now, but we are in the midst of changing distributors. So right now, the Clos LaChance wines are special order in Chicago. They are abundantly available in Virginia, Nebraska, and where am I forgetting, Jeff?
Wisconsin.
Readily available in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So the only place where it's a little tricky is Chicago, and that's just because there's some distributor changes happening there.
Yeah, and that seems to be the common theme anymore with many of the programs we're doing in Chicago. It's sometimes a hot mess with different things, but
Distribution there is a very hot mess. We do have a question though. Can we offer the exact blend for the Meritage in percentages? Do we have that info handy?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hey, give it to us, Maestro.
I do. Let me find it.
it was on
It is 41% Merlot, 39% Cab, 10% Petit Verdot.
There you go.
There you go.
Would anyone like to see some pictures of the estate before we go?
Sure, I'll only shoot through those real quick.
Awesome. All right. So I'll put a little slideshow out here for you guys. So you can see classic, majestic California hillsides. There's the entrance to the estate. It's a beautiful place. Highly recommend anybody who's in the area to go check it out. It's super cool, especially if they're doing one of their concerts in the back, which you see out here. So this is the back of the winery, and there's this beautiful patio, and you've got this green lawn, and right past this lawn is a beautiful stage overlooking the vineyards, and they do some really good shows out there, and they also do some pretty cool weddings. And that's my quick watch out.
Very cool.
I mean, I'll tell you what, I mean, these wines definitely over deliver. You know, I appreciate you guys sharing your time, sharing your stories, sharing your passion, first, and I guess, you know, to end with, you know, about the wines and things that you do. And so with that, we'll sign off. Make sure, even though they are, as David said, readily available, make sure that if you enjoyed the wine, stop in, taste them, try them, buy them, take them home, come back and buy them again, so to speak. So appreciate everybody's time. Enjoy the evening, and we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for
Bye,
having me.
everybody. Take care.